Welcome to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, where certified financial planner Loren Sherman shares thoughts on having a healthy mind, body, and spirit, an abundance of wealth inside portfolios and out, and lessons learned from clients and mentors over the years.
Welcome back for another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. We are going to jump back into our conversation with Isaiah Douglas of Swan Bitcoin. As a quick recap of part one, we gave a high-level overview of what Bitcoin is, why it's so popular, and why it's different than other cryptocurrencies. We also walked through the different characteristics of an ideal currency and how Bitcoin may feel like it's relatively new at just 15 years, but with Bitcoin trading 24/7, 365, it has a much greater track record than its number of years would suggest. We wrapped up part one by posing the question, have we already missed the boat? Is it too late to invest in Bitcoin? I will let you go back and re-listen to Isaiah's response for more context, but in short, he gave us a resounding no, you are not too late, even if Bitcoin is not yet part of your portfolio. Today, we talk about the political environment around Bitcoin, how much allocation investors should have to Bitcoin, and where Bitcoin could be in 10 years. I also asked Isaiah to give his biggest concern against Bitcoin, which I think is an important question to ponder as we need to think through both worst and best case scenarios. So with that, let's jump back into the conversation with Isaiah Douglas. So I don't know if maybe we don't want to get too much into the weeds here about this topic, but someone asked, what are some of the different ways in which a person can own or at least have exposure to Bitcoin?
Yeah, you can do it via just every time you get paid, carve out a portion of whatever you typically save, buy Bitcoin. You can automate it. $100 a week, $50 a week, $1,000 a week, month, day, whatever. So, I mean, you can do that at lots of different places. Obviously, Swan does that. So it's something that we do all the time. You can do it with, I already have IRA assets. I've saved in my traditional or my Roth. I want Bitcoin exposure. How do I get access there? And can I keep that tax deferral? The answer is yes. You can do a partial transfer. A lot of people aren't going to be like, hey, listen to this podcast. I'm going all in on Bitcoin, right? It's like, okay, Bitcoin's maybe X percentage, right? Back to our conversation earlier. How do I get X percentage into this? You can do it that way. So,
okay,
yeah, you can own it in lots of different ways. If you have a 401k, yeah, you're kind of stuck, right, with whatever the options are there, unless you have like a brokerage link or something else that maybe you can open up at a Fidelity and maybe buy an ETF.
And things have really changed in the last few years, right? Because now we can access it through ETFs. We can do it right within the trading platforms that we're already using. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, maybe the purists would say you got to own your Bitcoin and take it offline, but you can do it in an ETF and easily get some exposure that way.
You can. And the one thing that I would say too is the option to self-custody, I think, is always important, right? Even if you don't want to and you're not ready. And that's the one big difference with like the ETFs is you can never redeem for actual Bitcoin. You never own it. It's a proxy of, which is, again, not the worst case scenario. And if early on it's like, that's the only way I can get access, go for it. If I'm right where, Bitcoin becomes kind of global money, it's something we use in the future, I think you're going to want the underlying asset. So at some point you're going to want that. And, the dollar exchange rate is going to change over time. And, dollars are going to buy you less and less Bitcoin. So the goal would be, own it in a couple different ways. And maybe it's the ETF in retirement, or, you want to not take self-custody, so you can own it in retirement. That's fine, right? But just think about, there's probably multiple different ways that you can own Bitcoin, and you don't have to learn about self-custody and all the nuance right away. You can buy it and then learn over time. And I think the optionality there is important.
Okay. And this one may get a little too detailed too, but someone asked specifically, they said, what about when someone inherits Bitcoin? Does this cause a problem only if you're doing the self-custody route, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say you want to make sure that you have a process. If you own Bitcoin today, that, yeah, your loved ones can get it, because if we're right and it goes up in value, you want to make sure that they have access to that, even if they don't want to hold it and we're still in a dollar denominated world, that they can use it for whatever they want to use it for. So yeah, there are much better ways for recovery of inherited stuff. There's these ideas of like a collaborative multi-sig. So like one thing that we do at Swan, we have a Swan vault where we hold a key, client holds two. They always retain possession, come hell or high water. Swan wiped off the face of the earth. Doesn't matter. They still have possession of their Bitcoin.
Oh,
We
sure.
have one key though. So if they have an heir that holds one, that heir can never steal from them. They can't do anything bad. But let's say their parents pass away or their grandpa passes away. They have one key. They can bring it, prove, just like you would file an insurance claim. Hey, Isaiah passed away. I have a key. I'm on the list of, the people I can talk about this. Here's the key. Swan brings their key and then the funds can be sent. But they're safe and secure where you're not trusting
Sure.
a third party. So I think there's a variety of ways from an inheritance. It's obviously going to be a stepped up basis. So let's say someone bought Bitcoin early. It's going to be the same way. If you inherit it, it's going to step up that basis. So it's not like you're going to have a
Right.
bunch of taxes. Could be estate planning issues in the future, depending on where those limits are and where Bitcoin goes. But yeah, there are better solutions. There's going to be stories of people that do a poor job here and end up losing Bitcoin. That is a real thing. If you take it and you have that responsibility, it's also your responsibility to make sure the people around you know how to access it. And there's a trade-off
Yeah.
of security and recoverability, and like there's a fine line that I don't know if there's a perfect solution, but I will tell you there's lots of companies in the space that are trying to make it as easy as possible but also as secure as possible. And it's like I think there's going to be some pretty
Yeah.
nice businesses built on that whole idea and concept.
Okay. Well,
So
and
more
I
to come
think,
there.
yeah, you touched on some good options there. And I think people forget that this can be an issue with any type of money. I think someone buries $100 bills in their backyard, or they burn up, or they get lost, and that can happen pretty easily with paper money too. So it's not something that's unique to Bitcoin. It probably has a better process, if anything.
Yep. Yeah, it's just you can create basically the private keys to access that Bitcoin. Bitcoin's always held digitally, and you just need basically the ability to unlock that digital vault to send it. And that's the thing that's really unique about Bitcoin from that standpoint.
Okay. Well, I have a few remaining questions for you. If you can stick around for us for a little bit
Yeah.
here still.
Yeah.
Um, so we're going to pivot and get political for a second, because nothing can go wrong when you
Fun.
get political,
Yeah.
right? But one of the questions, it's pretty clear that Trump has expected, and his expected cabinet, I should say, are much more pro Bitcoin in general than the current administration. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that and saying, hey, we're now heading in a more positive direction, or if it's simply saying, hey, there's going to be new people coming in every 4 years potentially, or even potentially every 2 years at the midterms. So is that something that you really think a whole lot about, or I guess politically, where do things kind of fit with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin itself is apolitical, right? It is math and code, and it doesn't care who you are, who you voted for, all that stuff. Now, I think there's going to be political parties that are going to look at it and say, "Hey, we can gain a voting block that also is financially fairly savvy, most likely has some wealth, and we want to earn that voting block." And there's more and more people every day and every year and every election cycle that are going to be single issue voters of like, hey, if you're going to protect my right to hold Bitcoin. And I think the political realm today is that Republicans are more pro Bitcoin and broader crypto, even though I think broader crypto is going to end up being messy. And I would, encourage folks to stay away from that. But I think that you'll see some legislation that's going to be more pro that world.
Sure.
And yeah, the Democratic Party is not been that way. They've been very anti. They've been very hostile towards Bitcoin. And I think that's a
Which in some
mistake.
way, I
It
guess
doesn't
I'm
make any
curious
sense.
too. When does that drive Bitcoin as well, though? Because then people are almost more apprehensive about the future of traditional dollars, or is it more, hey, we would prefer an organization or a administration that is pro Bitcoin? I think would be the kind of the obvious
Yeah,
answer.
I don't think anyone's going to raise their hand and say, yes, please give me a government that hates Bitcoin is going to make it as
Right.
hard as possible for adoption to happen. What I think is nice, regardless of whatever you think of like Trump and the current administration that's going to be coming in, love them, hate them, whatever. Bitcoin is a tool for freedom, right? It is money that you hold. You don't have to trust anyone else. So you don't necessarily need their permission to hold it, to use it. It gives you freedom and flexibility where you have more self-sovereignty. So back to your libertarian kind of roots and principles, like that is a very libertarian bend. And that's kind of where I think the libertarian crowd has gravitated to Bitcoin, because it is so apolitical and it's like, it doesn't matter. And so whatever
Right.
your political lens and views, like Bitcoin doesn't care. It's just there to store the value that you can create and allow you to do the things you want to do, and not allow a government that you may or may not agree with to dictate what you do. But yes, the Republican Party is very pro Bitcoin. They've proposed a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Senator Cynthia Lummis talked about it at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville over the summer. It is going to be presented, and the rumblings and the rumors are it has legs. And this is the idea that the United States is going to buy a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which they're going to buy 1 million Bitcoin, which would, I don't know how they're going to buy that much, but it's 5% of the circulating supply, or sorry, 5% of the total supply of that 21 million. And they want to use it to pay off the national debt. They have to basically hold it for 20 years and go through that process, but they would buy it in the stage of 5 years would be the idea and the concept.
And this is who's kind of
Cynthia
proposal?
Lummis. Cynthia
Okay.
Lummis is the one that's going to present it, and it is supposed like it is going to go to Trump's desk in the first 100 days. Like that has been communicated, that is done.
Okay.
There is some of it that needs congressional approval. Trump can do some purchases with an executive order, and so that is being looked at. What that does from a Bitcoin perspective is hard to know for sure. But if the United States decides that they're going to hold Bitcoin, that signals to the rest of the world we need to own Bitcoin as well. And 94% of all the supply of Bitcoin, that 21 million, is already out in the marketplace. So there's a lot that's already out there. There's not a lot that's coming, right? A lot of it was issued early on. And there's going to be, I think, some scrapping and fighting and clawing to get your hands on some Bitcoin in the future. My big thing has always been by 2025, I think the average US household to get one Bitcoin is going to be a huge, like, momentous occasion. And I think it's hard. Again, at $100,000, it's hard for the average American household to get one Bitcoin today. And I totally understand that. I believe that. I think it's hard. I think it's going to get harder, but that doesn't mean that Bitcoin at $500,000 or $1 million of Bitcoin it's too late, right? Because there's still a lot of runway for it. It's just better money, and there's never a bad time to have better money or have a better asset than something that you don't have. So from a political perspective, I think that there are cases from a conservative, from a libertarian, from a progressive, however you view the world, money that benefits people, that people can go to work, be the best version of themselves, save into it. If they spend less than they make, they can acquire the goods and services that they want, and they can actually pass it down to their kids. They don't have to have, a hedge fund manager as a cousin to like manage their money to make sure it lasts so they don't eat cat food and they're under a bridge.
Sure.
Like that is a beautiful thing that you can actually go and make money, save it into something, and you don't have to do all this extra stuff for it. And that is, to me, universal across all the political spectrum. There's a lot of things I think most people, whether Republican, Democratic, Libertarian, agree on, as much as they want to polarize and make everyone hate each other, which is stupid. There's a lot of things we all agree on, I think, for the most part. There's obviously crazies on both sides, or all three sides, right, that are going to be like extremist. That's fine. You need those people as well. But most people just want to like live life, love their family, believe what they want to believe. Like,
I think the core principles are there.
Yeah,
they're overlapping for sure. Well, one last kind of politically related question was specific to your thoughts on the Treasury Secretary. Any thoughts on that? Of which opinion of
Lutnick and
related?
Bessonnet, I think is the guy's name. Both of them are pro Bitcoin, so I think both are going to be pro Bitcoin from that perspective. And it seems like Scott Bessonnet, I think, is probably the likely candidate that's going to win. Depending on when this airs, it might already be done. Maybe Trump says tomorrow who it is, and we'll see if I'm right. But that seems to be likely who's going to win. And
potentially that might just accelerate. I don't know. It sounds like
either appointment is going to accelerate it. I mean, either appointment is going to be pro. It's going to be much better than what I think has historically been there.
Okay.
From a Bitcoin perspective, whatever someone wants to say. So my opinion is it's better.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Wrapping up with just a few questions here. Actually, let me ask you, maybe this would be potentially the hardest question you've ever been asked Bitcoin related. We'll see. So
challenge accepted.
All right. It's easy to kind of straw man different arguments and give the weakest argument. So if you were to instead strong man the opposing view, what would be their one point that you would say, okay, that's a fair point, and maybe you have a counterpoint to it, but what would be the strong man argument potentially against Bitcoin?
I think that you could point to that Bitcoin being decentralized is obviously critical for it to be successful, so that no one can co-opt it and control it. I think that the mining structure today that we have in the environment is more centralized than people would like it to be. And this is going to get nuanced where some people are going to be like, I have no idea what he's talking about, and that's fine. But
Sure.
basically, today, if I have a Bitcoin miner, I'm never going to mine a Bitcoin block and earn that reward and make that money. Today, about every 10 minutes, it's call it $315,000 worth of Bitcoin that's given to a Bitcoin miner. So it's very lucrative, very attractive business. Lots of capital's gone into this space. Nation states are mining. It's There's a lot of money to be made there, and it's really
Yeah.
important. And you can take excess energy and turn it into Bitcoin that can then go anywhere in the world. So really, really cool. If you have stranded energy and, cold, weird spots, you can just turn on a generator, plug in some miners, and boom, you got global money that you can sell for other stuff. But there's things called mining pools where people pool their hash power or the machines together, and they all point their machines in the same spot, and you get paid out pro rata. That
Yeah.
is very centralized behind the scenes with some key players that come out of China. And so people will point to this as an issue where they could censor transactions, block stuff. And I do think that's a legitimate argument and a legitimate risk that has been underappreciated in Bitcoin, because the idea of it being, unstoppable and they're not going to censor transactions and all this other stuff. If you got to the point where that was a bigger and bigger part of the mining pool, and it's a big part today, it's over 50% is probably all kind of through two kind of key entities on that side. They could say, well, we don't want to allow someone to send Bitcoin if they are XYZ, if they were able to identify exactly who you were. Bitcoin is
Oh, sure.
pseudonymous, not anonymous. So if you
Okay.
have basically, if you leave fingerprints, let's say digital fingerprints, and they could tell who you are, maybe they want to block all your transactions, where they would never mine a block to put your transaction through.
Sure.
What's happening is there's a couple companies that are trying to put the hands back into the miners, that they're mining pools that allow each individual miner to actually create the transaction. So it decentralizes that better. And that is coming, and that is a big part of what's happening. But that would be one where I would say, if I was a big critic, that's where I would hit on. It's not
Okay.
that the government's going to ban it. The government's not going to ban it. It's not that it's going to boil the ocean and use too much energy. We waste a third of the energy we create, and we have tons of stranded energy all over the world. It would be that it could be too centralized and controlled by a small subset of people that might have nefarious goals, and you want to make sure that it stays decentralized so that no one can make those decisions. That's the beauty of
Okay.
Bitcoin. That would be the area that I would point to as like, that's a real issue if
Yeah,
I was
that's
to really
interesting.
punch at it.
Yeah, we probably lost a few listeners of saying, "What the heck is he talking about?" But I think also people love to dive deep into this stuff too. So probably got some people leaning in to that question. Um, Let me see. There's just a couple that I had wrapping up here. Are there any Bitcoin related questions that you get, or maybe that you don't get very often, that you think are relevant and should be discussed? Kind of the unasked question. Is there anything top of mind for that?
I think a lot of people, we've touched on it a little bit, is like, oh, well, I can't afford a 93 or $94,000 Bitcoin. Yep. Start where you can, buy a little bit. You can buy in fractional amounts. The big one that I'll get is always like, what is it? I think we tried to discuss that a little bit, but just really understanding that, Bitcoin is something that allows you to store value into the future. You can spend it, you can use it as currency. It's not taxed that way in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of it like a lot of times it's all about allocation, or where's the price going to go in the future, which is always like, well, let me shake my crystal ball that's broken and tell you
Right.
it's going to go a lot higher. Again, if it goes up to 200 trillion, there you go. There's a big number. I don't know when it's going to happen. Um, I cannot think of something that would be, a lot of times I'll hear it has no intrinsic value. That's one that I'll hear.
Okay.
So I was just going to a piece that I had. So a lot of times people say Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. It has no cash flow. It's not worth anything. There's no use
Right.
case. So let's address that one. I think it's a good question that I hear a lot.
Okay.
So intrinsic value is a faulty concept. There's no such thing as intrinsic value. And I'll explain it. So I'm in the Sahara Desert. I have a Rolls Royce, brand new. It's beautiful. It's your favorite vehicle, but you're dying of thirst. I have a bottle of Dasani water, which is the worst water in the world, right? Disgusting. You see hurricanes come through places. Dasani water is still available. People don't want it. It's terrible. You're dying of thirst. Are you taking the Dasani or are you taking the Rolls Royce? Which has more intrinsic value to you? Well,
Sure. The water.
we're taking the water. We know it. But if I'm in Iowa or I'm in Indiana and someone comes up to me and says, would you like this brand new Rolls Royce or would you like this bottle of Dasani water? You're going to say, yeah, I'll take the Rolls Royce. Thank you. So this idea of intrinsic value is that it's all in the eye of the beholder, and it's human action, right? It goes back to kind of some libertarian principles of the idea of everyone's going to make their own decision, and maybe it's not always rational, but they're going to try in their own mind to make it rational. So there's no such thing as intrinsic value. Like, what is intrinsic value? That's just a faulty concept that I think a lot of big math, finance nerds like to throw out there. Like, oh, there's no intrinsic value of Bitcoin. Is storing value that you can port anywhere around the world have value? Of course it does.
Mm.
And if the market has told you that it went from a zero to a $2 trillion asset in 15 years, like, there's something there. Maybe you're missing it. So there is this idea that there's no intrinsic value. There's no cash flow. Cash flow is great. Sure. Love that. Holding Bitcoin is great too, because the cost of goods go down. Do you have higher cash flow or do you have, more Bitcoin? And I think ultimately, if you own Bitcoin and you use it to buy goods and services, you can see that go down in price. And so your cash flow, unless it's growing at a really high clip, is still going to be less useful. So those are two that I usually hear.
You mentioned something about people maybe not fully understanding Bitcoin, and that being a reason that people would not invest into it. One counter to that, I would say, is, if people are invested into the S&P 500 index, how many people fully understand the business model of NVIDIA or what a lot of those companies are doing? Maybe some of the basic ones they do, but I kind of think that we put sometimes some of these, like Bitcoin would be on a different standard, thinking we have to understand that before we invest in it, even though, if we're being honest, we probably don't fully understand a lot of the investments in our portfolio.
Yep. It's the same thing as like, I can't use technology I don't understand. Use the internet. I can't explain to you exactly how the internet works. Like, if we really got in the nitty gritty, like, okay, explain to me how your router and how all this, like, explain it all in detail. We don't know. It's just created. We know that, hey, we follow these steps, we plug it, it works. There's people that know it. But you need the tools to make it simple. And I think that's where Bitcoin has been, is it's been a little bit too difficult for what I'll call like the normal person to get. It is way different today, where any normal person can learn Bitcoin. If you can follow recipes for your favorite Thanksgiving meal, right? So we're close to Thanksgiving. We'll use that example. You can self-custody and hold Bitcoin and buy Bitcoin. It is not that hard. I believe in you. You can do it. Like, I'm not going to tell you you're too stupid to use Bitcoin. It is an excuse that people will use. I don't buy that. I think incentives drive everything. And if you have an incentive of like, you want this thing, you're going to go do it. And so for a lot of people, they don't feel enough pain yet, perhaps, of why they don't want to learn about it. That's fine. And they have to make their own decision, right? They're adults, they're big boys and girls, and they'll decide what they want to do with it. And if they feel like, you know what, I don't need Bitcoin, you probably don't. You make that decision, and it's not going to be you or me or someone listening to this that's going to, change the outcome of where Bitcoin goes. Like, we don't have enough capital to move the market, right? To change that. And Bitcoin will be successful regardless of that. And I think it's, in a free and open market, Bitcoin wins because it's just better. That's it. Like, if you just look and stack everything, positives, pros, cons, like, it's just a better system, and ultimately that will win out. And I believe that. That's kind of where I've landed.
You made a comment about not fully understanding how the internet works, and that made me think of something I've heard you say in the past about advisors who are so out on Bitcoin are going to maybe look at like the people who are out on the internet of the 90s or of the past, like it's a passing fad, and it's not going to be around for the long run. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but that just stuck with me when you said that.
Well, there's old advertisements about electricity and how it's, there's the people that, like in the cartoons, that are tangled in the wires and electrocutes them to death, and it was like the anti-electricity crowd. And it's like, what? That's so silly. No one would ever do that. Or those electric carriages are going to kill everyone. Oh, you mean cars? Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll stick. The carriage manufacturers were going to tell you how terrible the cars were going to be. And like, I think anytime the status quo gets pushed, it's going to be hard, and it's going to allow or force someone to have to change their mind. And for some people, if you've invested time, energy, et cetera, into learning something, and then all of a sudden something comes alongside and shakes up that worldview, that's really hard for someone to accept. And Bitcoin does that, especially for traditional finance. It shakes it all up. It says, oh, that's great. You have your CFA and you went to Wharton and you did all those cool things and you run this hedge fund, hey, guess what? Little old Isaiah in Indiana has outperformed you for the past 5 years because all he does is just buy Bitcoin. And there's nothing you can do about that. And that makes them mad because it's harder to charge, 2 and 20 or do these different things and make all this money because they have a lot of activity. But at the end of the day, they aren't creating more value. And I think that's a big issue for some people that are closer to kind of the monetary system itself. What I was told from someone else is like, sometimes it's easier for people that are closer to the earth, more blue collar, work with their hands, see that to get Bitcoin. And I grew up, like I told you, I grew up in Indiana. I grew up on a hog farm. Like my dad farmed. I did not. Like he gave that up before I would have ever been old enough to like take it over, right? Or whatever. My brother, same thing. But it is one of those things where like I saw like the blue collar mentality. That's how I grew up. And like I came into the financial world because I was interested in money because I saw my parents struggle with it. So it was like I saw what the work takes to like create all that stuff. Like it just doesn't magically come. And I think for people, if it's too white collar, you have to work to like see how things come together, maybe it is harder to grasp it. But when you realize how much work it takes to like have an economy and have things run, I think those people get Bitcoin a little sooner. And who you never have to explain Bitcoin to are people that are from foreign countries that have seen their currency just absolutely devastated. Talk to Brazilians, to folks that are in Argentina, to people in Turkey. Bitcoin makes all the sense in the world. They love it. They like dollars too, because the dollar's been more stable than their currency, but you don't have to explain to them why Bitcoin has value. They get it. They've seen their savings revalued 50% overnight. You had 100,000 Turkish lira one night, you wake up and now you only have $50,000 worth and you're like, huh? What?
Yeah.
What just happened? Oh, well, we decided to make a change. That's, again, we're very fortunate to be in the US.
Yeah. This is just a shot in the dark, but I bet a lot of advisors would blush if they looked at your percentage of Bitcoin in your own portfolio, but you don't have to share that with us. But
I was going to say, I've told people for a long time, I own pretty much next to no traditional assets. There's just no reason for me yet to do that. I'm not saying that's the right allocation, right? It just makes sense to own Bitcoin for me because it's a superior asset. I have, cash flow. I have, employment. I have all these other things where it's like, I don't necessarily need these funds. So I can ride through volatility and I'm comfortable where I've spent enough time that I think this asset is superior. Now, will I only ever buy Bitcoin? No. But it's made sense for quite a while. And yeah, I think, if I would never be the 5 or 10% type allocation. So it's definitely north of 50. So
Sure. Well, I purposely appreciate you sticking with us because we've gone a little bit over the time that we had allotted, but I purposely saved this question for last. So you already touched on it a little bit. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but the question everybody wants to know, a lot of times this one came back. If you had to put a bet on it of your own money, not any financial advice, of course, where realistically would you kind of expect or think maybe Bitcoin is 5 or 10 years down the road?
So you heard the podcast that I did with another advisor on the 10-year bet and what I said. Do you remember what I said on that? It's fine if you don't.
I want to say you said maybe 1 million.
So the decade I said 1 million, and I think that's probably on the lower side in a decade.
Okay.
And I say that for a couple of reasons. I didn't give the context in that discussion as much. I think we're gonna have to create a lot of dollars. We have a lot of debt. We have a lot of debt that's rolling over as a country. We have to pay a lot in interest expense. So we're just gonna have to create more money, which is gonna be more inflationary. So I think the dollar will continue to be worth less and less at an accelerated rate.
Sure.
Not hyperinflation. I'm not saying you're gonna have wheelbarrows to buy bread. That's not where I'm going with this, but I'm just saying like what we've seen over the last couple of years of like, man, costs have really gone up. That is something I think will continue to go into the future. And you're gonna see the homes that were $500,000 homes that are now $1 million. You're like, how is it that house is now going for that amount? It's because we're going to have to create a lot of more units from that standpoint. So I think in a 5-year time frame, I mean, I would even say in the next 24 months, I wouldn't be surprised to see $500,000 Bitcoin. That would not shock me. If we see the strategic reserve, if we see other people from a nation state or sovereign wealth funds buying Bitcoin in size. Again, it's a $2 trillion asset. There's not a ton.
You've already talked about how its market share is relatively small from where it could
still very small. And so, I think you can see a pretty big number quickly. Now, does it say stay at that number in the next 2 years? No, I think there's a lot of volatility. It could go to $100,000 or it could go to $500,000 and go back to 125. That could absolutely happen. And I would not tell someone like, yeah, that's unreasonable because I've owned Bitcoin and it went up to 70,000 and it went back to 15 and a half, right? Like I've seen a negative 70% move. And so I'm never going to tell someone it can't do that. But what I would say is Bitcoin is going to go up in value, partially because of the system we're in. It's like pre-programmed, and that seems very goofy, but I also think the S&P is pre-programmed to go up in value.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's one of those things like you need to understand your time horizon and what the asset that you own. I think Bitcoin works really well for goals that are 5+ years down the road that you are saving for. It is really good for that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If I need it for 6 months for my mortgage payment, unless you're really, really, really a diehard Bitcoiner and have a lot of conviction, a lot of savings, probably not the right asset to own. I'd own something different.
Sure.
But if I'm saving for college for a kid, if I'm saving for a house longer term or retirement and I have 10, 20 years, I think you're hard pressed to find a better asset. So yeah, Bitcoin's going to go up. It'll be, I think, 6 figures. I think 2025 will be wild. I think it'll melt a lot of people's minds thinking about what does Bitcoin do. It's going to get a hype cycle again. People are going to get over their skis. It's going to get too bullish, too crazy, too whatever. If I'm someone that's wanting to acquire Bitcoin, buy some, save into it, be consistent, ignore the pool, that siren song to be like, oh, go all in, put a ton in, more than you maybe should or more than you feel comfortable, and just continue to be, steady with what you do. And I think you'll wake up in 5, 10, 15 years, you'll be really happy with what you've done. So avoid the FOMO of like, I have to do this.
Sure.
And I think if you have a plan and you can stick to it and be realistic with what can happen, you can do really well for not only yourself, but like long-term for your family, which I think is a big reason for me too, is like, I want to be able to make an impact on that stuff too. So,
yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile to have from my vantage point, have at least the conversation with clients and, get some exposure there. And like you said, I mean, you have to start somewhere, and with Bitcoin, you can start really small if you want to. So makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So title of the episode is Bitcoin to $1 million, next year, right?
There
Get all
you
the
go.
downloads.
I had to ask that last question.
I did not
that
say
was
that.
That was the one that so many people came back, and they of course have to. Yeah.
People want to know where the price is going to go, and the crystal ball is in the shop. It's broken. I'll be wrong. So could be wrong on the downside, could be wrong on the upside. Never know.
Right. Yeah. People ask the same about the stock market all the time, and it's
got
to get back to the fundamentals, and you can't really. It's hard to prognosticate beyond that, but I think you give a lot of valid reasons for why there's a lot of growth potential there still.
Yep.
Well, Isaiah, I really appreciate you joining and sharing all your wisdom with our audience. This has been a fun conversation, and it was kind of an easy one for me because I bring you on as the expert. You do all the talking, and I got all the listener questions here from people listening, so I didn't have to do a whole lot for this one.
It's perfect. Take the win. It's like this is an easier recording. So I appreciate the opportunity. I think they're great questions. I think you should wrestle with questions. It's fine to poke holes in it. It's not that Bitcoin is, perfect. I don't think I ever want to make that claim. I think it is a significantly superior asset to lots of other things. You should own some. You should do your own research and dig into it. I think a really good resource for that, there's one called welcome.swanbitcoin.com. It's basically an hour kind of fundamental, like 101, maybe things that I missed or didn't do a good job at explaining in this specific setting where it felt maybe conjointed or we jumped around to different questions, but it can give you kind of the building blocks and then you can grow from there. But that's welcome.swanbitcoin.com. Definitely check that out. It's an hour video, but it's broken into like 5 to 15-minute chunks on one topic. It's really well done. It was done last year around Thanksgiving. So that it's easy if you talk to a family member about Bitcoin and you're like, yeah, I think this has merit, and they ask you a bunch of questions, you kind of point them there. But it's an excellent 101. So I'll make sure I share it with you as well.
Yeah, we can link that in the show notes so that people can access it right there. And then also, if you have any good PDFs that we can share, we can put that we can link that with the episode as well.
Yeah, the Fidelity Bitcoin First one that I cited earlier would definitely be one that I would encourage people to read, because again, I'll joke, it's non-propaganda from the company I work for. It's like, just go read there's plenty of great resources and so many awesome people that have sat and thought and written and recorded content on Bitcoin. And so I would tell anyone that's listening, if they have a specific need, ping me and just say, I want a resource on this. That's fine. I love sharing that stuff. There's a lot of good stuff at Swan, but a lot of stuff that's been created outside of us that is fantastic.
Is there a good
Education's
way to
important.
find you directly that we should share?
Yeah, if they want to go on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on X or Twitter as well.
Okay.
Then my email is isaiah@swanbitcoin.com. So anyone can just shoot me an email and just say, hey, I'm
Okay.
looking for some information. I want to understand this better. You said this thing on the podcast. Tell me more. I'm happy to share resources there. So I try to
Awesome.
keep a good list of stuff that's been impactful to me that I've learned from.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate it. And for all of our listeners, if you want to look at any past episodes, just go to not Healthy, Wealthy, Wise anymore. We can go straight to our primary website, integrityguidance.com, and click on the podcast tab, and that will have all of our past episodes. And then we'll come back with a new episode in 2 weeks. So, Isaiah, thank you for joining me, and God bless to our audience, and hope you join us next time.
Thanks for the time. It's great.
I know that a lot of listeners have been asking for an episode about Bitcoin, so hopefully this was both helpful and entertaining. We have a future episode planned where we will specifically walk through many of the biggest objections to Bitcoin, where we're going to try to look at the validity of each one. So I think that will be helpful too, but hopefully this conversation was a great place to start. Find all of our past episodes at integrityguidance.com and come back in 2 weeks for another episode. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, we would love if you took a quick moment to leave an honest review. Of course, we're shooting for 5 stars, but if you have suggestions to improve the show, we would love to hear from you too. Just click on the podcast name, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, and scroll down to ratings and review. Thanks again for your support, as this helps us reach a wider audience and help even more retirees just like you. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Loren Sherman is a certified financial planner and co-owner of Integrity Wealth Management, an investment advisor serving retirees in search of their own healthy, wealthy, and wise retirement lifestyle.